Hello, humans, from our new Square One studio. There have officially been 3 of these buildings, but we're just calling each new place we move to Square One because, I like Square One. I've had to start over many times in my life, and it's a comfortable place for me. And every time I fall flat on my face or start something new and have no idea what I'm doing, you just start from Square One. So we're here. We're in this new studio. We've been in work build mode for 2 months, 6 weeks. I actually have lost track of time. So it's a little awkward getting back in front of the microphone and now video cameras to do this podcast. But thanks for waiting. Thanks to everyone who reached out on Patreon or on Instagram just to say hello, check in with me. It's nice to feel a little bit more plugged in and in touch with other people as we do this. There's some new additions to doing this program at this new studio. We're now equipped for video. And while I'm not used to video and we are getting used to doing video, we are absolutely showing the videos that these conversations produce on Patreon. If you would like to become a patron and see us figure this thing out, you can go to patreon.com/howtohuman. It looks amazing, except I am just getting used to being on camera. So it's a funny experience. The product is both great and a little strange, I think, at least when I watch it. Here we are. New place, same podcast. So with the couple weeks that went by in between doing podcasts really regularly and then building out a brand new studio, we had to figure out who was going to be the first guest for this space. And I decided to go with a close friend of mine, an amazing professional as well, Beth Anstandig. I never actually know how to say it. I know her as Beth. She owns an amazing piece of land called Take a Chance Ranch. I met Beth a couple years ago because a friend, listener, and patron, this person has become all 3 things over the years that we've known each other. I would say it started out as just an online kindred spirit, but it has grown into a real friendship. Said, hey, I know of this person who's an hour away from you, and she's pretty incredible, and I've worked with her. Beth is a licensed therapist who decided to use her horses as part of her practice and now teaches leadership workshops and really uses these incredible animals in pretty wild ways, no pun intended. And I can say that actually firsthand because I did the whole experience. I drove up to the ranch, pulled up. First, you're greeted by the dogs, then you're greeted by Beth, and then you get to see this herd of horses that she hosts, I would say, on her property in pretty spectacular ways. Her work is really important to me and to some of the stuff I would like to shine a light on going forward in the show, which is that we are animals, We're a great ape who happens to have some miraculous skills like being self-aware, being able to kind of peer around the corner of what's going to happen in the future, really get to experience what it is to be alive, I think pretty differently from some other animals, but at heart, we are an animal. And even more so, we're a social animal. We're a herd animal, as Beth would say. And I'll share a story about my own personal experience with community. Obviously, I'm in recovery. I have a very cool community of people that I get to interact with around addiction and all the things that entails. But in terms of my work life, I was producing this show and doing the show physically alone. I've had some amazing help. Meg and Misty, if you happen to listen to this, hello. Thank you for the help that you've done. But physically alone producing the show, and a therapist that I was seeing at the time came up with the idea and basically said, hey, I really think you either get somebody to work on this with you or get a job where you're with other people because I think you're struggling alone. And I don't think someone of your temperament should be alone. I dove right in. And thankfully, my best friend, Reese, decided to jump onto this project with me. And now Ben Russick, who's a previous guest, has jumped into the project as well. I am experiencing this type of soul work in a completely different way. My ups and downs are much more stable. When I am low, I have people that can help and carry some of the load, and vice versa if they're feeling low. And it was really the start of firsthand understanding that me going on this journey alone, talking to people who I'm interested in and recording these conversations and trying to capture what's happening on the inside, which is what this show is trying to do. I'm trying to learn, which I would be doing anyway, and trying to capture some of the moments that happen along the journey and trying to document some of the things I learn along the way in real time. And if you listen for longer stretches of time as the show goes on, you're actually in dialogue with my own evolution as you are currently going through your own evolution as you have your own life. So doing this with people has been such a joy, and it is something that I will always look back on and wonder, how come I didn't do it this way sooner? Which is not necessarily a great question to ask yourself, but a moment in my life where I am learning so much about not only how to be Sam, but how to be Sam in the world with my little group of friends and family and fellow travelers. So it's a little hard coming back to this after so much time out. It's definitely a skill to riff and catch it all in one take and make it a smooth process, which this final product will not be. But, it's good to start with something that you don't have to stitch too badly together. But I'm grateful to be back. For those of you watching on Patreon, I'm grateful to see you. And for those of you that wrote iTunes reviews while we were away, what a gift to be able to read them, be covered in dust, covered in grime and shipping grime, which happens when you order a stage on freight. It comes in a box covered in God knows what. And to get to read these little reviews and stay in touch with the book club. And here's the latest iTunes review, which I loved. It said, it's from Atticus is their alias, and this is what conversations should sound like. Sam, you are an unmistakable raw talent that I'm so thankful I just happened to discover. Soon enough, you will be in the top 10 rankings of Apple Podcasts. Thank you for your confidence. I don't know if that'll ever happen. It's not the goal, but I do love when people take time to reach out, say hey, and I will try to make sure to remind you to do that a little bit more often, because reading them is a joy of mine. So here is Beth Anstandig on her experience creating, designing, and learning about how to be an animal and how to be a herd animal. Hey, Beth.
Very important.
Are you ready?
I'm so ready.
This is our first podcast in the new studio. Hello, book club. Hello, patrons. Thank you for putting up with me. It's good to see you all. And hello to all the audience that listens to the show. And there's a ton to figure out. It's been a journey, but we're here, and I'm not allowed to cross my legs.
Am I?
You are, yeah. But the way I cross my legs goes in a shot. So anyway, hi.
How does it feel not to cross your legs?
Strange.
Yeah.
So I'm going to go with the hands over the tummy, which is very comforting as well.
Yeah.
Yeah. So Beth, hello.
Hello.
We know each other. We've been friends for a while. We got introduced by a mutual friend, Ty.
Yeah.
Hello, Ty.
Hi,
if you're
Ty.
watching or listening. And it's always a little bit different interviewing someone I know, because there's like with my friends or like, I'll use your language, like herd members.
Yeah.
We do such deep dives that by the time we're talking publicly, I have no idea what's public and what's not. So we'll just go slow and I'll ask lots of questions. And if there's anything that you don't want to talk about, just let me know.
The good news is for you, everything's public for me. I'm really very open about my life, and I can modulate how deep I go with certain topics. So you don't have to hold back.
Perfect.
Yeah.
Okay, Beth. I start this podcast the same way every time. Who are you?
I am a poet. That is who I am, first and foremost. A deeply feeling noticer of things. And that poet part of me is compelled to bring what I notice to life with words and emotion and meaning, and in the hardest form perhaps possible. And but it's the form I fell into early on, and I really experience most of my days of my life from a poet point of view. So first and foremost, that is who I am.
And how about second most?
Mammal.
So
Animal.
Poet mammal friend of mine.
Yeah.
I will shout out your business. You're also the owner of the Circle Up Experience over at Take a Chance Ranch. What city is it in?
Morgan Hill.
Morgan Hill. I've been there
California.
several times.
Yes.
And I was pretty blown away by your operation the first time that I went there. And so Ty, I believe, called me one day and was like, hey, I have a mutual friend. I think you should check her out. She's got something pretty cool going on.
Aww.
And just pulling up to the ranch, seeing the horses, meeting you, it was just like, oh, this is really cool. And
it's a poet wonderland. It is a poem. My place is, that's sort of how I experienced it and built it was. So I hope that when people arrive there, that they're having an experience that feels like it's reaching an artistic, human, emotional part of us.
So I think we'll get there. But first, I would just kind of, our book club just read The Drama of the Gifted Child. And I've always kind of I've been through a lot of therapy. And
Me too.
Yeah. And I have a lot of therapist friends. And so I've always kind of heard how important our genesis is, the beginning. That book actually captured it in a way that was okay, I kind of got it now. And yeah, I'd love to just start off by asking, where'd you start off from? What is your genesis? I know where you end up, but let's go through some of your story that's covered in your new book.
So The Drama of the Gifted Child was a very formative book for me. And I am a therapist, but I became a therapist much like it's talked about in The Drama of the Gifted Child for not necessarily all the best reasons.
Oh, what are those?
What are the best reasons for being a therapist, or the reasons that I'm
convinced all therapists are a little loony.
Yeah, I was totally running from myself. So it was my last ditch effort to not have to deal with myself was to get the state of California to give me a license to focus on you.
Yeah.
So I don't think it was fully conscious, but it was once I realized that I could avoid my own growth just a little bit longer with that professional track, I was all in. So yeah, I was definitely a broken healer. And that book, I did read that book when I was in graduate school, and it has stayed with me, and I've grown into it. I think it's grown with me. I've grown into the content in it. And when I just looked back at it not long ago and had recommended it to a younger friend, and I felt grateful that on this side of my life, after reading that book and doing some more growth, that I didn't feel as raw to read it.
Yeah, it's heavy. It's emotional, heavy lifting.
It is.
For sure.
Yeah.
So how'd you end up a therapist? I want to kind of go early.
Early.
Yeah.
Okay. So I am the daughter of a therapist.
Oh, okay.
And I grew up outside of Detroit, and my parents split up when I was a baby. And my mom was single and depressed and lost and teaching PE, and decided to go to school and get a PhD, and became a therapist. And I think that I look back at what we get as we age. I think one of our opportunities is to start to see our parents and our family as people, not just as the roles they played in our lives. And I can look at her narrative as like an entity unto itself. It's not just connected to my own. And I can see how she was running. And but she kept running, for quite a while. And where that led us was into a relationship with my stepfather. And I do write about it in the book, the house that she moved us into, which was named the Mushroom Manor. Yeah. And so I think there was some early chaos around the divorce and my mom's depression and her going into survival mode as a young single mom, trying to get it together and make a life where she could sustain us. And that I don't have a lot of memory around that time, but I can see how it shaped a lot of worry in me. And but I do have a lot of memory once we moved into the Mushroom Manor, and it was a really chaotic space.
The snapshots in the book, for me, it's like this little girl who finds like safety in the wilds, not in the house.
Yeah.
And I thought that was really interesting. I taught outdoor education a little bit last year during COVID. And yeah, it's funny how, like, even though the wild, like, outdoor areas, wilderness, I'll say, is pure chaos in a lot of ways, especially with the various ecosystems working together and, the carnivores and the herbivores and this constant struggle for life. But to find peace in the wilderness is an experience that I have, even living in the wilderness for periods of time, where you are kind of closer to that chaotic nature. But then, yeah, the insanity of some of the human world is nothing like nature, even though nature has its own degrees of kind of chaos. So I love that picture of the little girl who would run out. There's a dog, right? What was your dog?
A couple dogs.
Yeah, there's a couple dogs.
Yeah.
Run out into the backyard, and that was the safest, most peaceful place. And then you come back to the Mushroom Manor, which, if you want to describe it, please do.
Yeah, there was a lot of outdoor space to retreat to, and the animals caught my attention early on, and I have early memory of noticing the contrast between how I experienced myself at ease with them and what I experienced when I was around other people, around other adults, or around adults. But I think it was true with children as well, being around other children. And so the Mushroom Manor was my stepfather's bachelor pad, and it was several young men who were divorcees or single, and it was a party house.
Wait, that's why there was all the bunk beds?
So there was one room that I lit. When my mom moved us in, I was there full time. I would go to see my dad on the weekends until he moved out of state. And so when I would go see my dad, all of these guys would have their kids over. And so there was one room with like 10 beds in it. And that was my bedroom, which is really eerie when I think about it now. I slept in a room full of empty beds. And it's just very unsettling I was 3-4 years old. So
were you worried and nervous as a kid? Could you feel that? Me too.
Yeah, constantly. And the poet in me, and I think it's why I identify with that label first and foremost, is that that has always been who I am. So I experience the world very intensely and pick up on nuances that are going on around me. And sometimes people refer to that as being an empath. And I think we're all empaths as mammals. So I don't entirely agree with that label, but being able to be aware of details in our environment, that is a temperamental trait that not everyone has. And then the desire to interact with that which is happening around us and to make meaning of it and study it and come in contact with it. I had that drive from a very early age. And it puts us in a predicament, I think, if we have an unstable environment and there is a lot of chaos and there's no one helping you make sense of that and you don't have any coping skills, you have this innate drive going on to have this interaction with the world, and yet trying to do it feels completely unsafe. And so in the Mushroom Manor, I'm in a room with 10 beds and there's, drugs and alcohol everywhere and people aren't making sense. And I'm watching people not take care of themselves or each other. And yet this part of me that's inescapable, the sensitivity and the studying of what's happening in and around me, I couldn't turn that off. That's not, and thank God I see now that it was like, that is my gift. I'm so glad that it stayed alive.
And so as that person is going through the world, coming of age, what's that journey look like? Like
Oof.
that person starting to become their own person.
So I think that adolescence is our first spiritual crisis.
Oh, definitely. Yeah.
And
it's the death of childhood.
It is that, and part of the death of childhood creates a scenario where that little girl that you described that could go out into the wild and go into this place of reverie and imagination and could go into fantasy and these, I would say, safe dissociative states where you're in another world and you can put yourself there. Our hormonal world comes to life and we lose that. We lose the ability to escape in a safe way. And what starts to come into focus is the world around us that feels abrasive and inflammatory, that doesn't feel good in contact with our system. We can't get away from.
Yeah.
And we get really pissy about it. And then the people around us, rather than helping us and supporting us and helping us move through that and learn, shame us for that pissiness, for that, we're looked at as less than in that adolescent phase. When actually what's happening is we are waking up. We're coming online as spiritually aware. We're seeing the things around us that we're defining how we want to live and who we are and what's okay and what isn't. And we're not supported.
I've heard somebody describe Adam and Eve getting kicked out of the Garden of Eden as the birth of consciousness, like really early adolescence, when you're starting to be self-aware and all of a sudden your naked body is a problem and you're a problem and you've lost something real.
Right.
And the way I look at my addiction these days is so much more compassionate than I did in early recovery, because I've gone back there, over 11 years or 10, close to 11, but over the past 10 years, I've been able to go back there sober so many more times,
right,
and really see a kid who just wanted to initiate into manhood. And there was no men around. There was like dads, sort of, but the dads are off at work. And there's, like if I think of like a traditional hunter-gatherer herd situation, like there isn't those tiers of generations of men everywhere.
That's right.
There's like, you see them maybe if you're lucky reoccurring weekly, but you're not around them and you're not seeing what they're doing. And so to find this group of kids that seem to think they know what is going on and what life's about, which a lot of teenagers, myself included, we felt like we were onto something when we're leaving the sober consciousness, when we're getting high and when we're raging against the machine, you know, like we really thought we were onto something. But it was really just kids trying to initiate themselves.
Which is being onto something. I mean, you're finding your own power in the world. It's just that we need to do that supervised. We need to do that with mentorship. And even if there had been more men around, there's so many generations where we haven't had that they're ill-equipped and didn't get that either. And so even if you'd been surrounded by men, it doesn't necessarily mean that they would have that which you needed, which was being guided through that process and supported through it.
So what'd your initiation into your power look like?
Then?
Then.
Geez. Yeah. So
I shared. So you share.
No, I'm on my way, friend. Yeah. So I've got this sensitive poet. She can escape into the wild, and then things start to really come online, and that awareness kicks into gear, you know, really intensely. And I am not happy with what I see. And I keep trying to have conversations about it, and no one wants to have them with me. And I get sent to religious school.
At what age?
10, 11.
Okay. Yeah. Right there.
Oh, right there. And it's
Catholic?
Jewish.
Oh, okay.
And it's to learn, it's Sunday school and sort of have a Jewish education, but also to go through the very social ritual, not spiritual ritual, social ritual of studying for a bat mitzvah. And it's all about the social component of it. And it's about perform, do this thing, because that's what we do. And this is what we want our family to look like. And so I'm going to learn Hebrew, and I'm going to learn this ancient language, and I'm fascinated, and I want to. And so I want to study it. And when I have questions, they're like, you just need to learn the symbols and read them phonetically. You don't need to know the meaning, which was like the worst thing somebody could say to me. Of course I have to know the meaning. That's what I'm all about. That's who I am. And so I got kicked out of religious school.
You got kicked out of religious school?
I did. Because I was not willing to not have my questions answered.
Wow.
And then I got sent to the rabbi. And so I had regular meetings with the rabbi where we debated the meaning of what I was learning, and it still went unanswered. And it was really, the message was overtly and subtly, just do this thing, Beth. Just stop asking about it and do this thing and have the party. And I started drinking like that year.
Yeah.
And right out of the gate, almost died first time I drank.
What happened?
My best friend and I split a fifth of vodka.
Oh, wow.
And I was, maybe like 90 pounds and got severe alcohol poisoning. She went into a coma at my house. And I didn't. I got really, really sick and for many days and had sores on my body. And she was in the hospital. She almost overdosed.
Wow.
Yeah. First time out of the gate.
I was Bacardi rum. Similar-ish story. Got so sick.
So sick.
My friend fingered, excuse my language, everybody, a senior girl, though. So the next day, that was, it wasn't
heroic.
It wasn't that I had been throwing up all night. It was like, the promise is real.
So I woke up having no memory of what had happened, and my entire house was trashed, and I woke up and got my period for the first time.
Wow. It's like all the things all at once.
Yeah. Yep.
And then you're just off to the races, or what's the story?
Yeah. You'd think that after that kind of an episode there'd be some parenting or some self-reflection, but there was neither. I was actually asked to apologize to my friend's family because it was somehow my fault.
Yeah.
Which then, there were just these series of kind of, I mean, they almost feel like social betrayals where it was like these, and I think about this in herd behavior, and I'm sure we'll get to that at some point, but it's like the herd exists because we have norms of how we're going to treat each other that are good for everyone. They're good for everyone's survival. And so that early like religious spiritual argument that I was having, and then the thing that happened with my friend and this like, requisite apology to her family, there were all these betrayals from my perspective, and still like these are not social norms that I would ever sign up for or ask my own daughter to sign up for. And yet that's what I was doing. That's what I was asked to do.
Yeah, it makes me think back to the drama The Gifted Child, where one of the big takeaways that she really hit on was how unchild friendly our society is. And like, I mean, so much so that, like moms are constantly mocked, right? And like even like stay at home moms are kind of like looked down upon. And it's like, it's ridiculous. It's amazing that there's not more messed up. I mean, I think a lot of us really have real healing journeys. I don't know if you come out of life unscathed, but we certainly could do better.
We could certainly do better.
In honoring that process, both in terms of when we go do our own work and we're looking at our own selves, not to judge it through that lens, that, that kind of like you were stupid lens.
Right.
I had a conversation with someone on Sunday night, and it was about how they just felt really dumb. They had made some bad choices, kind of invested energy in the wrong horses, bet on the wrong horses. And, that little switch from like, how could I have done that? Or like how I'm such an idiot, to like, oh, well, what did I learn? Because we learned a couple things, that they're not good bankers and they're not good homeless shelter operators. Right. They shouldn't be lending people money, and they shouldn't be taking people in who are at risk at this point in their life. And how could you possibly have known that without trying to bank and trying to run a homeless shelter?
Absolutely. I went through a divorce during the pandemic, and it was a 20-year relationship. And so I've had a lot of healing to do of my own. And so I've been in therapy, like I ramped it up again, really like a bigger commitment into my own healing. And I just did like 2-3 weeks ago, an EMDR session that touched on this. And it was the belief that we got to was that I had this fear that I was not, that I really wasn't going to take care of myself. And I didn't know how to take care of myself. And through the EMDR process, which if you're not familiar with it, is, this really brilliant and the most researched trauma treatment out there. And
for like acute specific traumas, right?
Well, no, you can use EMDR for, what happens is you may enter the process through an acute specific trauma, but it will touch on any of the network of trauma that is still unhealed or blocked within you. So it's like clearing out cobwebs in like any of the places where there's trauma.
Yeah, I have yet to try it. I know you got your certification.
I got certified in it. Yeah. But I really spent more time as a client in EMDR than I have as a practitioner. And it's been, I did my first EMDR intensive in 2007, and it was right before I got sober. I got sober in 2008. And I don't think that I would have been able to get sober had I not done that work. Because it was, my nervous system was so just jacked up and had been for so long. And I really didn't know that it was ongoing PTSD that was driving that.
That's funny. Yeah, I got really interested in it, and then it was kind of painted like, hey, if you don't have this one horrific event to point to, it's going to be hard for the practitioner. So I kind of backed off.
Oh, I would definitely reconsider. So this session that I had a few weeks ago, this belief came up, and your brain, through this bilateral brain stimulation, you end up free associating, and it travels through any of these, beliefs, physical sensations, emotions where you are holding trauma, holding blockages. It's like clearing out scar tissue, or cobwebs is like the best metaphor, but that I like. But what it got to was a lot of shame around some of the choices that I made early on, like those adolescent choices, that transition from trying to take care of myself as a child into adolescence and young adulthood, and realizing that I was carrying around a lot of shame for some of those choices. And when I was a senior in high school, things were so bad in the house that I grew up in. They were so dysfunctional and miserable, and I was so unhappy. And I was, definitely using drugs and alcohol, but I would go through periods where I would really try not to. And I would really give it a go. One of my best friends, I was actually on the phone with her right before coming here. We've been friends since we were 13. And she says about me in high school, you were always quitting something. And I was.
That's me now. That's nothing like me as a teenager.
I was always trying to quit. You just went for it.
I thought I found the way. I wanted to be a drug pickle. That's
there was probably later in my disease that it looked a bit more like that, but
like I wanted to be Johnny Depp in Fear and Loathing, like just crawling from one scene to the other in a really fun way.
Right.
Yeah.
So there's this moment in my senior year in high school where things were so miserable that I chose to leave that house, and I moved into my best friend's basement.
Did you get emancipated?
No, I just left.
Yeah, you just left.
Yeah,
okay. That works too, I guess.
I'm leaving. And I was very unsupervised. And so there were periods like in my junior year of high school, my mom and my stepdad decided they wanted to travel, and they went like Hawaiian island hopping for weeks. It was very unsupervised childhood and adolescence. It's amazing I'm alive.
Yeah.
And I moved into my best friend's basement. It was this shitty, unfinished basement with like a shower in the corner, and it was really gross. It was not a good basement. Like there are good basements. This was not one of them. Moved into her basement. Her father, who was probably schizophrenic, I don't think he was ever diagnosed fully, but he was a public figure, and there were a lot of public episodes of his mental illness. He was upstairs in that house dying of brain cancer. And my best friend was popping narcotics like they were candies all day, every day. And my choice was to leave the house that I grew up in because I was so trapped and move into that basement. And that came up just a few weeks ago. Like, wow, that was me trying to survive. That was coping. That actually, and in that moment, that was a better choice, was to get out of the family of origin scenario because I could at least have some space. It was crazy in my friend's basement, but it wasn't as crazy as it was in that house.
Yeah, and all the upstairs crazy wasn't your crazy.
It wasn't my crazy.
Yeah, someone else's crazy.
Yeah, and so in that EMDR session, I realized like, wow, all the things I did make sense for a child without coping mechanisms, getting little bits of freedom and resources and trying to figure out how to do self-preservation. And now that I'm a student of self-preservation, that is one of my most studied topics in the work that I do now. I'm really owning that my alcoholism was absolutely an attempt at that. And I'm so grateful that I lived through it and that now I have a sober message to deliver. But I think we carry around shame and look at those as bad choices versus the choices I was making trying to get through a totally intolerable external world.
Yeah, that's one place where I kind of depart from other people in recovery that I know is like, if you knew what was going on in my mind, like, no, it doesn't make sense in the traditional track of success where you're supposed to be, doing good in high school and then going to college. And so if you look at my absolute meltdown, self-destruction, it makes no sense. But if you knew what was going on in my mind, you could see how it made perfect sense in that moment with what I know now. I suffer from the same kind of stuff where like my life is solidified in a certain place because of some of my terrible choices. Like, I irreparably changed my life in countless ways that aren't ever going back. And so, that's a dance that I have to do very gracefully because, that's like dancing around the self-destruct button. I know. Okay, if you have a good dancing partner or if you can, find a good approach, because there's good material there. Like that journey to the genesis of me, and that journey to the coming of age and the various trips to the underworld and back. There's good material there. But you also have to be careful because that is, a potential complete shutdown. Like, if somebody hasn't experienced, like for me, I have been falling deeply in love with reading, and you might hate this, but reading like theological
I don't hate it at all.
breakdowns, and I'm not doing a literal reading of the Bible or of the Old Testament. What do you call it?
The Torah, the Old Testament. Yeah.
Or of Islam, but just because it doesn't meet me spiritually, but I am reading it like I would read mythology and looking for like, what are the archetypes? What are the symbols? And, the more I read it, the more I feel like, hell and heaven are here.
Yeah.
Right. Cause I've been to the underworld and, clawed back out and it's like, I want to do the work and I also need to keep showing up for life and showing up for my kids. So it's just a careful dance, but it's tough when you've done things where it's like, wow, it feels like, and I'll never know, just like you'll never know. It feels like so much would have been easier if I had gone right here rather than left, and the fear and guilt that comes with that.
I don't know if it'd be easier. I think that smooth sailing doesn't prepare us for an internal kind of resilience or belief in oneself that I can handle what comes my way. And so I look at all that I've, some of them were choice points of my own. They were my own decisions, but all that I've lived through that's come my way without choice and with my own choices. And I think every one of those is a resource now. Yeah. And I think that anything that you can't see as a resource in yourself that you have walked through is probably an unhealed trauma. Once it's healed, it's a resource that you carry into whatever comes your way. I have a self-preservation muscle now that comes from walking through hell, living through hell, crawling my way out. And I know I have that, and I feel more at ease because of it. Yeah. Not all the time.
I can relate to that.
I mean, I've had a bad few days. I feel at ease in this moment, and I know how to get to ease. I have some experience I know how to do that now. And that faith in ourselves, I think that comes from surviving those hellish times.
And so at what point do you take a turn towards kind of the Beth that I now know, like the recovery and healing therapy, work with animals? It's
funny. I think I had, when you were bringing up theology and you said you might hate this because of my my spiritual crisis and religious trauma. I actually was a religious studies minor in college, and I was an English major, and I took a lot of biblical background in literature courses. And I was always studying spiritual paths and of all kinds, and fascinated by how humans make sense of the world around them and within them and those mythologies and stories. And I've just been fascinated by culture and people my whole life. And I think that even in the worst periods of my life, when things were really chaotic of my own making, I always had that. So that's always been a life raft, that part of me that's been a student of life and the poet, that part of me. But it was like 5 steps forward, 4 steps back, 5 steps forward. It was a lot of work trying to use those stronger parts of me and those more resilient parts of me when there's this part of me that was trying to take me down at the same time, that unhealthy part of me. That took a turn where I began to see that those were parts that needed to get into more conversation with each other when I got sober. And even I was already a therapist. So I'd been doing therapy my whole life.
Oh, you were
daughter of a therapist.
You're using and doing therapy?
Yeah.
Oh, that's fun.
I'm telling you, it was like.
So you like help people and then after work?
Absolutely.
Go to oblivion?
Do you know how many alcoholic addicted therapists there are out there?
I can only imagine. So one of my major gripes with the modern therapeutic, like talk therapy model is, and I think it's 100% because it was created with a lot of like weird male ego shit, is that the blank slate, you know nothing about me, and I don't buy the whole argument of like, oh, well, I'm trying not to project on you or this, that. It's like, we grow by hearing each other's stories. And if I'm talking to you about how I'm struggling in a relationship and you're actively in a marriage on the rocks and you're not going to bring that up, we have a problem as human to human.
Oh yeah.
Maybe as a therapist, you're doing the right thing, but I cannot stand it. And so I don't even know if the therapists that I've gravitated to are doing it right or not, but it's like, tell me about how you and your wife work through something similar if you have that story.
And if you have that story and you're withholding it, I think, like you said, it's breaking a human to human contract of mentorship and vulnerability and openness and being in an ongoing learning process of trying to figure out how am I going to be a human through multi-generational learning. And that's why I love living with a herd of horses, because it's a multi-generational learning process. That's what I observe and what I spend time studying and I've been a student of that for forever. It's the same. It's with all mammals. That's how we operate. I was originally trained psychoanalytically. So I had a therapy experience as an adolescent with a psychoanalytic therapist. So that would be that blank slate, like go lie on the couch. You don't even look at the therapist. And I spent a year in high school with a therapist who never asked me a single question.
Yeah.
And never said a word. And so I sat there. It's actually a funny story. I sat there for a long time learning about my own anger. And then this was in the 80s, and in the same building where her office was, there was a step aerobics class. So I would get dropped off for therapy, and instead of going to therapy, I would go to step aerobics because I decided that this was just a racket. So I had a lot of therapy and then decided to become a therapist. And I did do some good work along the way. I can't say that I wasn't doing, I did as much as I could.
Yeah.
And then I started practicing as a therapist, and my husband at the time, he got sober before I did. And that was the beginning of the end for me with hiding out, because I didn't have somebody in my home who I could focus on as the mess. He was actually working on himself and getting sober. And so I was sitting with myself and my own desire to run from my life and escape and not,
That's a really uncomfortable place to be when somebody starts changing the homeostasis. Like, I know a ton of relationships that's kind of the breaking point. One person's like, you know what, I'm going to start being active and exercising. And then it's like, as a observer, you're like, oh shit, like what is gonna like you're starting to exercise, like what the hell is gonna happen? Like you're rocking the boat.
You're changing all the rules.
Yeah.
So he changed the rules, and I went into a period for a few years where I got more and more rigid and controlling and weird, and I was building my career. So I my therapy practice, and then I just had one more really bad episode of drinking with a big blackout, and one of those just so many opportunities for very dramatic rock bottoms. And then the one that happened was like a run of the mill barbecue with a blackout.
Yeah. And the funny thing with substances is, especially if you have a problem like you and I do, is it only takes one, right? Like I used so many drugs and drank so much alcohol, and a lot of the time nothing terrible happened.
Right.
But you collect a few big things that people can point to, and all of a sudden people are telling you got to quit.
Right.
You know, it's like, if you knew how much I was doing,
you're like, this is nothing.
This is a great batting average here. Yeah.
So for whatever reason, that was my moment. And that's where I think that was a reckoning for me, where I had nowhere else to run, and I finally let go.
And then how does sobriety, therapy, and horses all
poetry
converge?
I think it goes back to what you said in the beginning of our conversation about our world not being child friendly. And it's not poet friendly either. You know, it's not sensitive person, adult friendly. And what I've been doing in my recovery over the years, and now in how I practice and how I live, is actually listening to how I need it to be, listening to my own needs and attending to those, and creating an hour or a day or a week or a business or a home or a relationship based on that, versus the non-child, non-human, animal friendly way that we have been sold life is supposed to look. And so, you know, that ranch that you drove onto, where you're like, something's happening here that feels different. You know, I've really created a life for myself, and I have learned, you know, being a therapist has informed it, because I've learned a lot about myself and how we operate. But I've also learned, like, that traditional way of doing therapy in a manufactured living room, I don't know if that's for me. And over the years, I let myself listen to, I don't think that's actually meeting my need as a therapist either. I don't think it's meeting my clients' needs, and I don't think it's meeting mine. And I started doing more experiential work outdoors in nature, moving with the animals, and started seeing something very different occurring for people. And it brought me back to some of those childhood roots. If there was unmet needs going on there around experiences we were wanting to have that were in our body and in our nervous systems, and listening to what our systems are trying to tell us, they're trying to find homeostasis. And we have all these social rules and social norms getting in the way that humans have constructed. So all of that comes together in how I'm living now.
And can you, just for the tape, and we'll edit it in perfectly, can you tell the story about trying to get your dream that you had?
Oh, with the
about
therapy
your office up the stairs.
Yeah. There was this. I had started feeling a little. I'd started feeling a bit trapped in my therapy office, and I had finally arrived at a beautiful therapy office. It was in a 100-year-old church in downtown Los Gatos, which is this charming little town here in California. You go up the stairs and into a bell tower, and then through these doors and into my office. It was all windows, and there were oak trees outside, and it felt like a little tree house. And it could not have been a better office. And I took my dogs with me. I had this wonderful practice. It was full. I had a wait list. It couldn't have been better. But I felt like something was missing. And I had bought I bought the ranch, and I've had horses the whole time, but that part of me that is a wild part of me, and that much more organic, creative, spontaneous, improvisational part of me was not in that office and could not find a way into that office. So I just got to be with that part of me when I wasn't working. But those two parts felt very divided in a way that was not feeling comfortable for me anymore. Because the more sober and whole I've become, when things don't feel aligned and integrated, it's not okay with me. And I don't ever want to escape my life. So if something's feeling misaligned, like I'm not feeling aligned in this office, that's a need not being met. So I started noticing that need, but I couldn't name it precisely. I couldn't really identify what it was. And I had this dream. And in the dream, I was driving my truck with a trailer full of horses, and I pulled up through downtown Los Gatos into the building where my office was, pulled the truck up, parked, got out of the truck, and started to unload horses. And it occurred to me that I was at my office, and the first thought I had in the dream was, how am I going to get them up the stairs? Which is really like such a funny dream thought. You know, it's like this absurd thought.
It makes sense to me.
How am I going to get them up the stairs? I thought that when I arrived at your studio today. I guess I couldn't bring a horse in here. And so how am I going to get the horses up the stairs? And then how am I going to fit them in that office? And I stood there on the sidewalk with like a trailer full of horses and one horse in my hand, you know, on a lead rope in my hand, and like puzzling about that. And then I woke up, and it was one of those big dreams where, you know, like something important has risen to the surface of, you know, now I can't unknow this. And I can't go back to this office. I have to start transitioning out. And because I have some healing and recovery, I didn't just, you know, like slam the door shut, lock the doors, and never go back. I allowed it to be a healthy.
You did a slow.
I did a healthy, sane transition. It's like the boringest thing in the world. There was very little drama involved, but that dream was dramatic, and it woke me up to what I needed. And I started working from the ranch and seeing people and seeing people more in groups. The longer I've spent with herds of horses and groups of horses, and I grew up with litters of dogs and a lot of dogs, and seeing animals in groups, the more I've understood the power and importance and need for us to live and work and learn in groups. And so a lot of that non-child friendly way that we're living, that non-human animal friendly way that we're living, has to do with our lack of group experience. And we do not know how to do herd life.
Most of our groups are just work, which is not a great, because everybody's got to be acting a certain way, and they can't tell you, you know, like there's a job that you could lose.
Right.
And yeah, it's like, I think it's, for me, it's one of the things I grieve about, like what I would say, like organized religion not meeting the modern times in a way that people are just way less engaged. Like I don't go to a church. I would like to go to a church or a synagogue or something, if it could meet me where I'm at. But one of the losses is that there's not a gathering.
Right.
Like there's like, and this is weird for a agnostic, you know, I refer to my higher power as the cosmic muffin.
Yeah.
It's weird for me as like an agnostic to say, but there's like a church-sized hole.
Yes.
Because
that's the herd.
That's the herd where it's like everybody meets, and you know there's a way that groups help each other. Where and self-regulate. Like if a carpenter is doing bad work, he's going to see all of his clients that he did bad work for on Sunday and have to somehow reintegrate back into the group, knowing he did bad work, or having to apologize for it, or whatever the road to redemption for that works. And nowadays where you can just
hide out, run away.
Yeah, you
disappear.
can, anonymously throw javelins and, laugh about it to yourself. And there's not, or you can, I've seen some people with bad business practices. You can get away with it for a decade, pretty easily. And that seems
3
like
decades.
Yeah. I haven't seen that, but I believe it.
Oh yeah.
Yeah. I've been very fortunate. The cases I held up as, oh my God, the world is fucked because this person is doing well. I fortunately got to see them face
Look at some of our politicians.
We are not going to get into politics.
I know, but okay. In terms of are these people having successes and getting reelected and having power, and yet they're still behaving in a certain way that is
politics
totally
is a whole other
celebrity
mess. We are talking about a class of people like Roman senators, where it's like, okay,
right.
There's people and then there's the political class, and
right.
We're going to just leave it at that.
Yeah.
But yeah, I find a lot more virtue in electricians and moms and just regular people than I think I've ever found in many leaders of companies.
Absolutely. And I think that if you're lucky enough to have your life fall apart and end up in recovery meetings, that's one of the first places that people often discover the power of a herd.
Yeah.
And it certainly was for me, because I was definitely doing life on my own, and it was going to be run by the power of Beth, and Beth as leader of all and knower of all, and it was killing me. And yeah.
One of the things I want to point out about the ranch is it's not like a typical ranch, you guys, where there aren't individual stalls for each horse. And you go there and there might be a area for a horse to have a specific thing, but then there's a open field area where there's just a herd, a herd of horses, running around, and that's how you meet the horses. Is you go, and you don't pick one from a stall and pull it out. You're entering a territory that's not really humans. Yeah.
It's not, and one of the things that the horse world is guilty of is doing to horses the same thing that we do to children. We make the world not horse friendly for horses, in the same way that we make the world not child friendly for children and not human animal friendly for human animals. Horses are herd animals. They're supposed to be moving and foraging 100% of the time together. And so we associate horses being in these tidy stalls, and they're separate, and we take them out when we want to use them. That's a colonialized version of the human deciding how the horse should live versus the human learning how the horse lives and learning to be in partnership with that, and maybe even learning from how the horse lives to learn more about how humans might need to live. So my ranch is designed to learn from the horses about ourselves. Yeah,
and you wrote a book on it. It's right here, The Human Herd. And it's part memoir, part your experience. But if you could share a little bit, you've spent 10 years
at the ranch
doing it full time. Is that right?
Yeah.
What are the big things that you've gathered that you think are our friends who can only listen and not join us in conversation? What are the big takeaways of spending time with, do you call them wild, or, are they
my horses?
Yeah, your horses.
No,
they're a pack. They're their own governing body in a way.
They are. They're their own. I refer to the herd as one animal. So they are their own system that regulates, and with the commitment of staying together and negotiating individual needs, so that each individual can be whole, so that they can be of service of the one animal, which is the herd. So it's a beautiful example of interdependence. I've never known a better teacher of it.
So what are some of the things where you've looked at them and you've got, oh, you guys got it right, and try to bring into your human life?
So the first piece is around self-care. So they never argue with the signals of their bodies or ignore those signals and pretend they're not existing. So when we first sat down and you said, that you can't cross your leg, it was great. You're actually, that is an act of self-care to start to think about, well, if I'm not going to cross my leg, what am I going to do with my body and how am I going to cope?
I think we'll have to change the camera angle so I can cross my leg.
Yeah. Like it's good though. You're attending to it. Cause what if you were to carry on? This is your beautiful new studio. You've built it. You're so excited to have this. And then you go for the next 5 years, not attending to that. Like we are taught to not listen to that.
Right.
That's that socialized piece of us is taught to stuff that. And we have signals from our body about what our body is needing to balance itself all day, every day. And the horses show us that when they get those signals internally or something changes in the environment that they need to respond to, they always listen to it so that they can survive and so they can be of service to the group. And so we have needs, and our self-care is not about a weekly retreat to, a massage or
bubble bath.
A bubble bath. No, we're talking about a radical commitment to ongoing attending to what's going on in our system that's trying to tell us how to stay in balance.
Yeah. Self-care is hard conversations, leaving awful environments, braving the unknown when you know where you are isn't safe enough, or
feeling anxiety coming up and saying out loud, I don't know what it's about, but I am feeling really anxious and I think I have to stand up and move my body. And as I start to talk about it, I might even cry, and because something has to get released. And now I can sit back down and do what I was doing before. Like that's an act of self-care.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think it's catching on. Like,
I think so too.
4 years ago when I started this program, it felt less like that. Like it really felt like self-care was like, treat yourself really good. Now I'm starting to feel like the public zeitgeist is catching on. Like if we're going to talk about the public zeitgeist, I really feel like there's too much affirmation in some areas. Like we both entered recovery where it's like either get with the program or die,
Right.
And there's something to that approach where it's like deal with your shit.
Totally.
Like ignore everyone else. And so
that's the horse piece though, is they're so connected to their survival, and their self-preservation is connected to the herd survival. And so if you've had a rock bottom in your life, whether it's been recovery or another kind of health issue or a mental health crisis or, something has, or, I don't know, global pandemic that's woken us up to survival and we come into contact with that, it's there we meet self-care in a more real way. So I think the horse piece, what I see from them and learn and study is how whatever signals their body is sending them or they are sending each other have to do with survival. So when I'm getting signals now within about something I'm needing, my first reaction is to wonder what is the need and to remind myself that it's survival based. So I think if we're far away from our survival system, which a lot of us are in Western culture in 2022, a lot of us are, but not all of us. We debate and negotiate and bargain with our own needs. But I think when you work in a profession like first responders, military, people that are in war zones, poverty, you live in a home that has violence, you're more connected to your survival, and you actually start to, you learn about self-preservation in a much different way.
Yeah, that's a great observation that horses don't ignore their needs.
Ever.
Yeah, and that's a teaching talk that I have with Jax all the time about kind of the nature of drug use. I'm a little, he's at that age where it's right around the corner. Kids are going to start using drugs and drinking. And I'm kind of like, listen, like this is my illustration of how drugs can become a problem. And I'm not a drugs are a problem kind of guy. I happen to, think the issues that come up outweigh the benefits that you can get from most psychoactive drugs. But it's kind of like, you can imagine you go to a job every single day and you really hate that job. So when you get home to kind of get some space from the job, you have a beer every night, or you have a drink, or you make a drink, or you smoke a joint, or whatever it is. And it makes you okay. And then you go to the job the next morning. What's the problem? And, Jax, who hasn't done drugs yet, is like, oh, the problem is that you're ignoring that you hate the job. And it's like our ability to defer our problems really is an issue. Like, one of the things these days that will really make me reconsider my relationships with people is if they kind of fuck with my intuition.
Oh, interesting.
Yeah. And so if I'm like, hey, is something going on? And they're like, oh, no, I'm fine. Right? Now, it's perfectly okay to say it's none of your business.
Sure.
Or I don't want to
feel like
talk
talking about it. Yeah.
But like if I ask you a direct question, or if you ask me a direct question, and a lie comes out, all bets are off.
All bets are off.
All bets are off for me. And it's like, okay, we're going to figure out what this relationship is.
I think that leads to the second part of the core lessons from the horses, which is that we have to have a stable and secure herd that is serving the best interest of everyone. And that means that it's full of honest feedback. And so if you imagine in the horse world, if one of the horses said, I'm sensing, if they could put words to their experience, and one of them noticed the other was holding pressure or tension or alertness, that horse seemed worried because they'd seen a mountain lion on the side of the hill. And that horse looked to the other one, and the horse was like, oh no, everything's fine. You're picking up intuitively, empathically, and you're picking up in all of the nonverbals and nervous system to nervous system that something's not right. And then there's an incongruency in what's being communicated about that. It makes it an inherently dangerous relationship. So it's worse than just, I don't like this. It goes back to it being entirely unsafe. And so that's a beautiful intuition to follow, that and incongruent behavior is what predators do. They pretend they're not hunting. They sneak around and act one way when they're actually thinking about doing something else. And so what the horses show us is that they're congruent with each other all the time because it allows them to be at ease together and give honest feedback to each other about what the group needs. So when you pick up on something like that with someone and they tell you nothing, you're right. They can say, I'm just having a hard moment.
Yeah, I don't think that they're bad people, but
totally. I
had this strange semi-father figure who was my best friend's dad, and he used to always say, you can trust a thief more than a liar, because if you invite the thief into your house, he's going to he's going to rob you.
Yeah,
that's what thieves do. But a liar, all bets are off. And that meditation on truth is not a easy one at all, because as I've fallen in love with the truth and then try to practice being a truth teller, it's not an easy path, and because where do you start and stop that? Like if you're trying to build an ethic for yourself, like a real code or creed, like where does it become mean, or where do you, rather than just blabber on the absolute truth, unfiltered truth going through your mind, maybe say something that's not untrue but not correct. So it's an interesting meditation for that. It's like everybody has to go down that path themselves. If you're trying to figure out who do you want to be in this world, and you're going through like, well, I want to be virtuous and courageous and honest. Well, if you focus on honesty, it's not so clear cut. Like I'm not trying to make it seem like clear cut. It is a path that everybody has to figure out. But for myself, there's like people who I know will tell me the truth. And if I don't need a truthful answer, I won't ask it.
Yeah.
Right? Because you'll really get it every time. And then there's people that are just a little bit more ambiguous, and it's a bummer to me.
They're just not going to be part of the herd that you create, that your inner herd, because that commitment to honesty and to truth telling is, as you're building that as a self virtue, you're going to need to surround yourself with people who have that as a collective virtue. It makes it a safer group. And so, but not everybody is committed to that, and that's okay. They don't get to necessarily be in your inner herd.
Yeah, you have to keep them a little distance.
It's just a different expectation on the kind of relationship that it is. They are not necessarily going to have your back. You can't have yours. It's not that level. We're not going to be linked into a survival system together.
Yeah, I really want to encourage people to start building deeper community and really feel like they're not just friends, but maybe chosen family, and really active in each other's lives and their children's lives. But you have a lot more experience on this. Like, so you work with a lot of groups. And like, what are let's say if somebody's like, you know what, I really want to send the signal to the people I love. Like, I want to be more active, or I want, as a community, and maybe meet regularly, or make more time for each other, because everyone's got busy lives, but really to actively kind of solidify some sort of covenant as a group. What are the first things that you just clear out of the way when working a group to start making it work better? Because I imagine you start to notice some patterns when you get 10 people together who want to either work in a corporation together and achieve great things, or they want to be, you said that you have even just friend groups that'll come.
Yeah, it might be family, friends, recovery groups, women's groups, corporations. I think that first piece that you said about I'm wanting the group experience, that being brave enough to state that desire, it is coming from usually a personal need. And it's such a vulnerable act to initiate that, to say, I am wanting this, and I'm needing this. And mammal to mammal, we know about our own needs from watching and listening to others' needs. That is part of that multi-generational learning. And so whoever steps into that moment of leadership and says, this is what I'm wanting and needing, lights up, that activates something within others, but someone has to do that. Someone actually has to put themselves out there and say, I am wanting this. And does anybody want to do this with me? That's what draws in. That's what starts to create a group. And what I see is that we're all really scared to put ourselves out there like that.
Yeah.
Is anyone going to show up with me?
How do you manage tough personalities? Like, every group has somebody who they love, but can just be kind of tough or sharp with other members, in the herd, the horse herd, there's room for all different temperaments and styles of being and relating. And a lot of times people that show up with kind of a sharpness like that are misinterpreted, or they don't understand when that's needed. And other people don't understand that about them. And so one of the things that is great about being with the horses and with the herd is that the diversity of personalities and leadership strengths are evident in the whole herd, so that when like a sharper, more protective, kind of tougher energy is needed in the herd, that's the individual that shows up to lead. And so it level sets a bit within groups and makes space for people to be who they are, and for them to realize that that's going to be needed at a certain point and valued. And I think sometimes people who show up like that have never been taught how to use that part of themselves in a good way. And so it just kind of comes out haphazardly and offensively, and it's misunderstood by others. And so in being with the herd and seeing how they operate and seeing how they give each other feedback throughout the day, all day, and starting to identify, well, which
horse am I most like? And who are you? Like, who are you really? What role do you play in this group when it's needed? And how can I start to see your value rather than seeing that behavior as negative? Maybe it's needed. We don't know when. We're not good at detecting when.
Yeah. I've noticed so we have like a patron book club. And from the start, my ask was like, hey, like, I know I create the Zoom link and I'll prepare questions and stuff, but I really kind of just want to be a member as well.
Right.
And one of the things that I noticed, like in the beginning, it was like, wow, there's a lot of different personalities here. I am like obsessed with the culture war, which is why this show is completely non-political. I don't think it's good, but like I can listen to someone talk for 3 minutes and know where they get their news. Right. Just by the verbiage they use to describe certain problems.
Yeah.
Like I understand the MSNBC from the Fox, from the America First Network, or, you know, or the various types of conservatives and liberals and libertarians and anarchists. Like, so I was like, oof, there's a lot of different, like it wasn't clashing, but I could just see like, there's a lot of different philosophies in this space. This is going to be interesting. And one of the things that I've noticed is that it's almost like two stones rubbing up against each other, where when you do it in a group and you're not actively in confrontation, like everybody kind of wears on each other in a pretty beautiful way.
Yeah.
That then allows all the pieces to fit together in some strange formation. And
that's beautiful.
Like there's someone in the group who I know has very different views about the world than me. And the whole time I'm just thinking like, all right, like the things I've learned from trying to build a group that will accommodate us all are tremendous life skills. For my own life as a father and dealing with people who I really don't want to deal with in the world, which I've come to absolutely love everyone in the book club, but you know, like whether it's teachers or principals or coaches or dads of other parents, you know, like, and so one of the things that I've kind of figured is like, I want to build a group where a flat earther and a cosmologist could still somehow share an emotional cup of tea. Because there is that kind of where I think it's so easy to silo now and end up in your own space that we're missing out on that kind of, I keep saying wearing down, but that sounds negative. It's not a wearing down. It's almost like allowing each other to work on the fitting. Shaping.
Yeah. That's what I usually refer to it as. I mean, it's, I think it goes back to this idea that if we start with a truth that we need each other, which we don't start there. Like, no. What if in this moment I decide that I need you? Like, which I do actually, because we're having a conversation and we've decided to do this activity together. So we do need each other in this moment. And so we're going to do what we have to and what we can to be who we are, but to try to find ways to come together in this interaction. And we're going to shape it into something. It's like taking a block of clay and turning it into something, and it becomes its own relational creation. And so if we start with this idea that I am going to show up, I need to stay whole, but I also need to have a relationship with you, even if it's for an hour. And so we're more shapeable and more willing to shape gently, I think, if we start with that truth. And that's a herd lesson. They absolutely need each other to survive. And I think if we started there, we would have you start with that principle in your group without whether you realize it or not. You need them to stay whole for the purpose of your goal, which is to have a group.
Yeah.
It's a primary truth.
Yeah. I mean, you know, for me as someone who on my own personal time, like really goes into the deep places, and I've had some really interesting online intellectual adventures. where you have very little in common with the people that you're trying to listen to and to understand, is it doesn't work for the pundit types, but for the people who are actually trying to come up with their own solutions with the information they have in an intellectually honest way, you tend to fall in love with the way that they look at the world, and so like one of the interesting adventures is like I realized like I kind of grew up. 9/11 happened right when I was a teenager. Like I grew up a little Islamophobic, like not outwardly, and I went to college with a couple of Muslim guys who I loved, and they would take me to the bars and watch me drink, and we had fun. But I just kind of realized that there was, when somebody was a Christian scholar or Orthodox Jew, I just had like more respect from them right off the gate for no reason. And so I started diving into Islamic scholars and you end up falling in love with bits and pieces of it, even if you don't necessarily end up agreeing with all aspects of it. I listened to a lecture by a very Orthodox Christian who was talking about no sex before marriage. And I thought it was absolutely brilliant. I thought it was 100% brilliant. That doesn't mean that I'm not going to not have sex before marriage. But, he had this way of looking at the relationships where, his reading was, you can have like opportunity relationships, which are just like, what do I get out of this? What do I get out of this? And then you can have stronger bonds, which are like like between a parent and a child, where it's not a great deal for the parent off the bat, and you're kind of just giving and giving and giving. But one of the joys that comes with that type of relationship is eventually you're able to love them even when they act unlovable, right? There's a safety and promise in that type of relationship that isn't so transactional. And I sent it to my girlfriend immediately, and I was like, I want your take on this. And we both kind of had the same read, where it's like, there's something really rich in that, and an appreciation for something that is not like the literal read is not necessarily useful to me, but there's something beyond it that I'm glad I got exposed to. You
decided to engage with it, though.
Yeah.
You made a decision to join it. Not necessarily to share the idea, but to join the experience of understanding somebody else's mind and way of thinking and inner being. And that you made a decision to do that. And so that's how you can engage with something that's controversial or not necessarily aligned with your point of view, if you make that decision. And that, again, goes back to deciding to be with.
Yeah.
And I think it's a beautiful thing. It's an act of having a moment of love for seeking to understand, even if I decide that it's not how I'm going to live or, what I think, but I can love you in this moment to understand your point of view. I think one of the ways that we get into trouble is when we're trying to understand others when their nervous systems are dysregulated, they're emotionally reactive, and we're having these kind of, we're not making sense. Our thinking is not clear because our brain has been hijacked, and we're trying to join up with another nervous system that is in that state. It's going to be contagious and upset us, and we can't come together with any kind of ease or open mind. But a lot of our controversial conversations, or when people are coming together from different walks of life, different religions, different philosophies, we come together and we get into that state. And is it really the content, or is it the underlying process of dysregulated mammals that's driving it?
Do the horses have an in-group, out-group kind of thing? Like, will you have multiple packs of horses that are like, that pack is the enemy?
So they have, the herd, within large wild herds, there are bands. And the only place where, so for mammals, fighting and infighting are not best for our survival. So if you think about that, like then what are the purposes of why do we fight or infight? And it's around resources. And in the world of horse herds, it's about breeding rights and food and space, so proximity. And so in like a stable herd, there's going to be periods based on life cycle and changes within the herds where roles change. And so sometimes there's negotiations and shaping that needs to occur. But that first primary truth of we are staying a herd, that stays intact. And that's what holds. That's the container that allows the shaping to occur. So that's the crucible. That it, as far as, in groups and out groups, I would say what I notice is there are individuals that get along where that shaping has a flow and a naturalness, just the same way you click with someone and it's just feels really good. And then there's others where it doesn't click as well. But if you just have a little more space in the relationship, it's fine. The same thing's true in the herd. So I notice it in my herd. There's, certain horses where the bond is just really galvanized. And then there's others where they're just, they absolutely get along. They are family. It's the same herd, but they have a spaciousness in the relationship that allows them.
Is that the pressure that you refer to? Because you use pressure when you and I were hanging out with the horses, and pressure is a big theme in the book.
It is.
But is that kind of natural distance of like, oh, I'm supposed to be this close to this person, and kind of...
I can navigate. So if there's a difference in temperament, it's going to cause pressure in the relationship. And so one of the ways to navigate pressure so that you can be in a state of ease is just to have more space. Then you can tolerate the tension of those differences. So you don't have to go all the way to another county. You just have to have enough space to be yourself and stay together at the same time. And so we're very extreme humans in this way, where we cut each other off or we are like on top of each other in very, wild swings. But it doesn't allow us to learn that there's many ways of shaping the relationship that are somewhere in between there. Again, with this idea that I have to stay whole and we have to stay whole as a group. So where do I situate myself so that I can attend to pressure?
You start with your own personal needs.
You start with your own personal needs, and then you start with negotiating needs with others. If we don't do that very well, I'm probably going to keep a little more of a distance from you, because we just have never gotten a good feel or flow going around negotiating needs. But it doesn't mean that we can't have a relationship. It's just the terms of the relationship and intimacy of it there's just limitations to it.
This is our first interview in the studio. It's definitely heating up.
It is.
It is.
Yeah.
Because we can't run the AC for noise reasons.
Yeah.
But I do just want to ask on behalf of the people that have a harder time voicing their needs. Mm-hmm. So when you are working with a group, and some of the groups that you have involve a leader of a company, mm-hmm. and for the people that aren't getting the airtime, aren't getting their needs prioritized in the same way, say, the executive mm-hmm. of the bunch gets to kind of exert over the group. How do you help mend that bridge for the people that have a hard, like, how do you help inspire those people that have a harder time speaking for themselves, or kind of checking in on themselves, or making sure this person isn't, messing with their regulation? How do you help inspire those people to, how would one listening to the show start to get to exercise a little bit more of their own energetic, like, autonomy in their relationships without messing up the whole system?
Well, I think it goes back to whatever it is that one individual is needing. If you can remind yourself that it's quite likely that you're not alone with that need. And so when you notice that need and you start to take care of it, that you are actually a part of the system. And so you voicing that need and regulating yourself helps the greater whole. And you are likely voicing and taking care of a need that others are having and helping them. And maybe even a leader. And so a lot of leaders don't actually express their needs. They think they're not supposed to. They think they're supposed to appear whole all the time. So oftentimes in the work that I do, I will see leaders struggling the most with that. And
interesting.
Yeah, they are supposed to appear completely intact and whole and self-sufficient, and they are just fine all the time.
Wow, that actually sounds better than the alternative, though, at least.
Well, they appear that way. It isn't actually how they feel. It's not what's happening, though.
Yeah. Well, Beth, thank you so much for your time and volunteering to be the first guest while we figure out the cameras and figure out the temperature.
It's great.
And all that.
It's wonderful to be here. I'm so happy for you. This is a beautiful space you've created.
Thank you.
Yeah.
To take us off, if I could hand you a cell phone and there was 13-year-old Beth who's really hating the mushroom manor and knows something's wrong but can't quite point out what's something wrong, what would that little dialogue be to that person just to help her know that she's going to become the Beth you are today?
Yeah. So you can keep listening to your needs and your intuition.
Say it like you're talking just to her.
Just to her. So, my dear, sweet little Beth, you are doing great, and you just need to keep listening to that inner wisdom and following those animals, and following the animal within you knows exactly what it needs and what it wants. And she is going to lead you into a beautiful life.
Thank you, Beth. Thanks for listening to the How to Human podcast. Or if you're watching, hello, patrons. Thanks for watching. If you want to watch us figure out how to do a video podcast, you can go to patreon.com/hellohuman or /howtohuman. They both go to the same place. Otherwise, we'll continue to post episodes free of charge to listen to here on iTunes or Spotify or wherever you're listening. And Beth actually has written a book while we've been friends. I'm sure she's actually been working on it for a while, but it came out pretty recently in April. It's called The Human Herd by Beth Anstandig. And if you'd like to know more about Beth, please go to because I am a boomer, thecircleupexperience.com/about. Check out the Circle Up Experience, and maybe you can book a trip down to Take a Chance Ranch or on Instagram at the Circle Up Experience. I'd love to hear from you as audience members. You can either write us a review on iTunes. I like to read all of those, or you can reach out on Instagram at hellohumans.co. That's our handle. And until next time, I hope you have a great day and continue just walking along on your journey.